All right, what's up? Welcome in. The first time we're doing this bad boy here. I have stolen the title. We're calling it a Hardwood Handicappers NBA betting board preview live, of course. So for all of those who are with us right now, always appreciate it. And again, Hardwood Handicappers, today's Wednesday, so tomorrow we'll have a new episode of the podcast. So what we're doing here, again, kind of experimenting with some live stuff. If you join us on YouTube, if you join us on Twitch, you can get involved in terms of the comments. There's something that I would really love to see, at least in terms of interaction with you guys as we continue to do these. Instead of me just kind of talking into the void and talking at you, it'd be pretty cool to get feedback. Get your own plays, get your own thoughts on what we're going to see on the betting board for the day. So I think we're going to do these about twice a week, maybe on these Wednesdays and Fridays, right? When it comes to some of these bigger cards throughout the week, right? So what we're going to do, run through the board. These will be quick, about 20 minutes or so each game. Injuries, news, live moves, everything like that as we go on. So again, get active. We'd love to hear from you as we go on throughout these live streams. So with that, I have also decided, since I'm by myself, to try to do this fancily and give you a little bit more to look at other than my tall hair and my ugly face, which is some production value. So let's start at the top of the rotation, work our way around here. There we go. See? Hey, thank you, Ruffy. Really appreciate that. So you get that Twitch stuff. I'm kind of young, but not young enough to where I really actually understand how Twitch works. I just go on to watch people play video games at a better level than me. All right, Hornets and Magic. Let's start here and work our way down the board. Seems like a fun game, and I wrote about this in the notes this morning. But I think initially when you look at this, and by the way, really quickly, as a quick aside, you see Hornets -6 with a total of 217. This is the opening number. I always like to use these as a point of reference so we can see where the market has gone, where we're going, where we end up. This game, first one on the board. So right now, as the opener was Charlotte -6 with a total of 217. We're down to 5s across the board, total up to about 221, 221 and a half. Depending on where you look for your numbers. So to me, when I looked at this game, I thought immediately that this is more about Charlotte from a defensive standpoint and from a power rating standpoint. Charlotte projected to be a relatively poor defensive team this season, right? Through the first 3 games, you don't really see it that much, and then finally they gets exposed Monday. They play the Celtics. Boston comes in, offensive rating of 121.9, drops 140 points, and beats Charlotte. So the market, it's clearly pretty low in Orlando. It's my lowest power-rated team right now. I think Oklahoma City, which we'll get to, is quickly catching up on Orlando in terms of being the lowest power-rated team, and the market says so. But what's interesting here is that Charlotte, how about this? They've been an underdog in 3 of its 4 games this season, right? Except for the one spot in which they were favored. That was over Cleveland, and they were just laying 2.5 at home. Right, so now you're talking about going on the road, opening up as a 6-point favorite, getting down to that 5. I agree with the market move here. I do think that this Hornets team is solid. For those of you who followed the coverage last year, you know how much I loved this team and how popular it has become in terms of a betting team, in terms of just a fun team to watch, right? They're young, they're springy, they get up and down the floor, they play good, sound, analytical basketball at the hoop, right, from 3-point range. But this seemed like a really strong move in terms of a power rating increase for Charlotte. To go from an underdog in 3 of the 4 games and a lone 2.5-point favorite over Cleveland to 6 on the road against Orlando. So I agree with this. I made this just under 5.5, right around there. So I think this Hornets team is really good, but this is going to be interesting. By the way, I misread my notes here. Made it more like 3.5 as opposed to 5.5. So I agree with the move here. I think Orlando's really bad, but I think that this is a really strong bump from a power rating perspective. And as far as the total goes, look, this Hornets team, we mentioned how bad they could potentially be this year defensively. It's pretty funny when you look at Orlando from the way that they have been playing basketball up to this point, and I'll pull up the numbers courtesy of Cleaning the Glass, by the way. It's one of my favorite sites. I'll give you an insight on this a little bit later in our broadcast here. But Orlando, in terms of the way that they have been playing basketball, I think it's been actually pretty fascinating. They've been chucking the ball from deep themselves. If you look at shooting frequency, they're actually 3rd right now in the NBA in terms of frequency of attempts from beyond the arc. 44.4% of their attempts are coming from 3-point range. They're only shooting 31%. But, we saw in the first quarter yesterday example for Oklahoma City, sometimes you get these games where you get hot and you're chucking this high volume of threes. There's going to be games in which you can perform at a relatively high level. You get those spikes in offensive efficiency. So I think that's why you see this. And you saw one of those spikes, by the way, when they put a 108.9 offensive rating up against the New York Knicks in that win back on the 24th. So as we move on from there, looking at the rest of the schedule. I think the best game on the board is obviously going to be this Heat and Nets game. So Nets open up as a 5-point favorite with a total of 218. Market wide right now, we're talking about Brooklyn 3.5 with a total of 217.5. And this is the second consecutive day in which the market has moved against the Brooklyn Nets, right? If you remember, if they lose on Sunday to those Charlotte Hornets, they come back on Monday to take on Washington. They open up 8.5, get all the way down to like 5.5, and win going away against the Washington Wizards, even with Bradley Beal on the court. So now you get this spot where they open up 5, and we're down to 3.5. So I got some time, got about a little over an hour, a little less than an hour here, and I haven't really eliminated the Nets from a play here tonight. Look, the betting market clearly thinks a little less of Brooklyn at this point right now, but I'm just not sure where I'm at, right, with Miami. Because if you look at Miami, the one thing we kind of know about them is that defensively I think they're going to be pretty sound. We've seen it up to this point. Defensive rating has been really solid, 91.9 points, every 100 possessions, 80.9, the defensive efficiency rating through 100 plays in the half court, right, or per 100 plays in the half court. But when you talk about this team from an offensive standpoint, Miami, you blew out Milwaukee, which was missing 2 starters and a bench player, like Dante DiVincenzo, Drew Holiday, and Bobby Portis. And then you look at it, the loss to Indiana, offensive rating of 87.5, and they beat Orlando. So I still want to see what this Heat team is going to look like from an offensive standpoint. You know, I don't really like it a lot. And from a defensive standpoint, schematically, it's allowed them to shoot 3-point shots. They have a really high rate defensively in terms of frequency of opponent shots from beyond the arc, which kind of plays a little bit more into the Brooklyn Nets' hands. So I understand the market being a little tentative in backing the Brooklyn Nets. It's pretty clear looking at the rotations and the way they're handling guys, you know, playing multiple bigs and doing all these things, that they're more experimenting with this. You know, Steve Nash has even said that this is kind of like an extension of the preseason, so it doesn't seem like they're going to be, as I have labeled them, one of the try-hard teams in the NBA. I think the Heat are. I think that was really clear in their win over the Milwaukee Bucks. They want to win these games, get a top seed. But maybe, again, the market getting a little overzealous in its anti-Nets feeling here. Look at this. Yeah, see? Thank you. Appreciate it. Use Twitch next time. I'd appreciate it. Anybody who's interacting too, by the way, you drop best bets in the comments, everything like that. I love to get feedback from people, right? I like to have conversations and hear what you guys are thinking on things. So there'd be really a lot of fun to hear from each and every single one of you. So with that, let's move on to the next game. Pacers and Raptors. So the Raptors are a team that I think I've gotten wrong to an extent. Like, I think I got wrong with Toronto that they would be more competitive, that their defensive ability and their ability in transition and their three-point shooting would be able to carry them, because we saw the half-court weaknesses coming, right? Wrote about it in the NBA guide. Last year they were a poor half-court team, and yes, Pascal Siakam's still not playing for them too, but I've been really surprised about how bad they've been offensively. But first, the positives for them, right? Limiting opponents to 88.9 points per 100 plays in the half court. 100.5 is their defensive efficiency overall, according to Cleaning the Glass. But from an offensive standpoint, through 3 games, 98.4 is not good. Their half court efficiency right now, 80.6, which is atrocious. And when you look at their three-point shooting, which I would expect to kind of get better as it goes along, 27.3%. So as you look at the market and what we've done to this point, Pacers open up 1 with a total of 219, but Toronto now the favorite at 1 with a total of 215, 214.5. So we have swung now in the other direction. When you look at it from an injury standpoint, there is a chance now that Karis LeVert makes his return today, potentially questionable. Haven't checked in the last 15 minutes. If that has indeed been updated, he is going to be out there. Still don't have like the usual suspects there for the Indiana Pacers. And I just think when you look at this from the perspective of Toronto, you know, I've taken my shot with them a couple of times. On Saturday, took the +4 against Dallas, and then in game tried to set up a middle with Dallas +3.5. Only got 1 leg of that. Monday, right, took 2.5 with them against the Chicago Bulls. Ultimately, they lose that game by 3. So I'm a little jaded by the Toronto Raptors because I've seen things from them from a defensive standpoint that I really like a lot. I tend to agree with the market move here. I don't think there's much difference between Toronto and Indiana. I myself made this a 1.5-point spread, but I just don't look at this, or I've been burned, I should put it, enough times here by Toronto to make me feel like, all right, you know what, maybe I'm wrong about this team and the way I've rated them, so I'm just going to sit back and see what's going to come of them. And by the way, a massive move to the under here. Open of 219, we're down to 214.5, but I think that speaks to the inefficiencies of Toronto offensively, and it also speaks to their ability on the defensive end of the floor, and I think that's why you've seen this drop as far as it has. And if you look to Toronto, Indiana, bottom half of the league right now in terms of pace. Toronto right now, 99.4 essentially in terms of their pace, and Indiana 19th so far, just over 100 possessions per game. So that's why you've seen this total drop down to as far as it has. So let's go to our next one up on the board. That'd be Hawks and Pelicans. Pelicans 6 with a total of 220 right now at this point. Let's see. Okay, yes, thank you, Ripshu. Hit that heart and that button right there. God, I feel so old, dude. I'm like only 30. What's going on here? I turned 31 in a couple of days, though, so maybe that's what it is. Hawks -6 at the Pelicans. So Atlanta bounced back from a loss to Cleveland on Monday, beat the snot out of Detroit 122-104. Offense has been somewhat inconsistent to start the season, but the defense has been really solid. 103.1 defensive rating, right? 27.4% allowed from beyond the arc. It seems like a pretty good matchup, right, statistically through this early part of the season against the New Orleans Pelicans. You're talking about a team in New Orleans from an offensive standpoint that's sitting at 96.9. And again, these numbers are pretty extreme, right? We're at the beginning of the year. We only have 3 or 4 games worth of sample size. So when you talk about a team like New Orleans averaging less than a point per possession, that's going to get better, right? They're going to start to average more than a point per possession. These offenses are going to start to find their flow here. But offense has been down this year as a whole. If you're talking about average offensive ratings on the season, it's actually been pretty low this year, and we've had some tightly contested games. Again, last night, unders went out, and if you look at what the season was like, if you read my NBA betting report coming into Tuesday, unders had a slight edge for the first 49 games of the season, 29-20 to the under. So we have seen a little less than stellar offensive play, or maybe you want to call it good defensive play. Maybe teams realizing that we have 82 games now as opposed to 72 games and kind of rolling things out slowly. But when it comes to New Orleans, not only is their offensive rating really low, but you're also talking about you're talking about really low half-court offense. You're talking about most of their offense being generated from either long mid-range, which is not the area that you want to do it, or 40% of their attempts coming from long mid-range, or three-point range, which plays into the hands of Atlanta's defensive scheme. Really solid along the perimeter in terms of shooting percentage for opponents. It's been relatively soft within 4 feet of the basket. So the betting market's been trending toward toward New Orleans here, though, right? We saw this open at 6 in favor of Atlanta with a total of 220. We're now looking at 5 across the board with a total of 219.5. So not a real bump here on the total, or excuse me, on the total. New Orleans treated better as well the other day. Got an outright win over the Minnesota Timberwolves. Maybe this is a play here too against Atlanta from a standpoint of overvalued nature. Their injury report, DeAndre Hunter is available. Danilo Gallinari is available, and no Lou Williams. So maybe the offense gets a little bit better if Gallinari is going to be out there. And Hunter's a really good defensive player. One I bet at 100-1 at MGM to win Defensive Player of the Year. But right now, I kind of look a little bit at Atlanta, but nothing in terms of a play. We'll get to the bets that I've made. They're a little bit further down the card. But right now, pretty static in terms of that. So from there, let's go to another Eastern Conference matchup that looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and that would be the Wizards and Celtics. Celtics 4.5 with a total of 226.5 at the open. Now we're looking at the board right now. Hooks are gone. It's 4 with a total of 224.5. So a slight move to the under here and a slight move toward the Washington Wizards. And through 3 games, I think the most surprising thing about the Washington Wizards has been how poor their offense has been. Offensive rating of 103.3. They're less than a point per possession in 2 of the 3 games that they have played up to this point. And even with Bradley Beal on the floor, how about this? Their offense right now, 98.6 rating with Bradley Beal, 11th percentile lineup so far this season. So not really good. And the Celtics kind of have their own issues on offense. But to me, here's the difference between Boston and Washington, which is why for me it would be Boston or pass in a matchup like this. Because with Bradley Beal on the floor, the offensive rating really hasn't been good for the Washington Wizards. However, for the Celtics, when you look at the lineups with Brown and Tatum early on, their offense has been tremendous. Offensive rating of 121.2 when Brown and Tatum share the floor together. That puts those lineups in the 97th percentile so far, qualified lineups at this point of the year. Brown's been dealing with injury, but at last look, not on the injury report for this matchup with the Washington Wizards. And looking at the report right now, because it gets updated every hour. That would be terrible. Right now, Peyton Pritchard is going to be available. Al Horford's going to be available. No Romeo Langford, but again, Brown not on the injury report. And keep in mind, this Wizards team too is pretty short-handed, right? Rui Hachimura's not with the team. You're still waiting for Thomas Bryant to come back. Raul Neto, of course, not playing. So, there is some, the lack of depth here for Washington too. I'm kind of surprised because it hasn't been a really big move, so I'm not overly surprised. But kind of surprised that the market's moving toward Washington. I just figured that the Celtics would be the side to back here. I thought the market would be on that too, given a win in overtime over Charlotte. So we'll see what that ends up in terms of that from a side perspective. Now, next two games, we've got some moves here. One of them concerns injury. Los Angeles Lakers on the road against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Lakers right now, we're seeing sixes painted across the board. This is happening over the next couple of minutes. So with a total of 216. So I would assume, I'll double check, but I would assume that we're going to see that Anthony Davis, who is listed as questionable for this game, is probably going to be active. If you have seen an update, I haven't checked for like 15 minutes, so if you have seen an update on Anthony Davis, drop that in. But given the market move right now for the Los Angeles Lakers, now up to 6, I would assume that is going to be the case here. And last time we saw the Los Angeles Lakers, of course, that was last night against the San Antonio Spurs. Not the best offensive game overall. I mean, it's great that Russell Westbrook comes out and drops a near triple-double and has over 30 points. But if you're talking from an efficiency standpoint, still having trouble, man. 104.2, the offensive rating last night against the San Antonio Spurs. Offensive rating in the half court was a little bit better at 94.2, but still had their struggles. And mostly, in terms of the most efficient area of the floor, that was, of course, in transition, as they usually are. But to me, for the Oklahoma City Thunder, at any point, the Thunder are going to be an under team, right? Thunder from down under. That's a good joke. And that's going to be the way to play it. Last night, I was on the under in that Warriors game. I got 223.5. Got to as low as 222, made its way back up to 225. Game was a dead under for the most part, unless you count, right, you don't count the first quarter in which the Thunder shot 64% from the bleeping floor, and I was sitting there cursing my mind out, thinking that I had the wrong side. I should probably see, look, this is what happens. I get caught up in talking, and I don't change the really cool bottom tier here. But regardless, for me, when it comes to these Thunder games, it's kind of like with the Orlando Magic. You're going to get some really inflated numbers, probably numbers that they're more inflated than they should be, right? And when you look at a Thunder team that last night put everything out on their floor to get really competitive with the Golden State Warriors, who didn't allow them to take a lead until the third quarter, and that was 45 seconds left into the third quarter, maybe it's a tough bounce back to come right back away and then take on the Los Angeles Lakers. But to me, this team's going to be an under team. Every single game every game this year but one has gone under the total. This is one of the worst offensive teams in the NBA in the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I think more often than not, when you're approaching the Thunder games, I think instead of playing against them on a night-to-night basis, ATS, which I know a lot of bettors might be tempted to do, I think the strategy is actually going to be playing these games under the total. Because think about it just from the perspective of, well, if you're going to be laying points, you would assume that the team that they're playing, whoever it is, whether it's the Lakers, whether it's the Thunder, or whether it's the Warriors, are going to be putting up some relatively solid defensive efforts, right? Keeping them under a point per possession offensively, limiting what they can do in that area of the floor, especially in transition. They're actually kind of a sneaky, cool, and good transition team. So my approach is going to be betting Thunder games under the total if I am going to be getting involved with them. And so far, that has been the way to go, and that's been the way that this has trended for Oklahoma City. Minnesota, let's go to this one. My Timberwolves, as somebody's called it, very true. Love the Timberwolves this year. So does Aaron Renning as well. Aaron echoed my sentiments on potentially the Timberwolves being a really solid team this season. So in terms of injury, that's the story here for this game, especially for Milwaukee, right? Milwaukee, the walking wounded at this point right now. Dante DiVincenzo not playing, Drew Holiday not playing, Brook Lopez not playing. Now, Bobby Portis is available, so maybe that helps him out, but you would also assume maybe a slow rollout here for Bobby Portis, so don't know if you're going to get like full board, let's go, psychopathic stare Bobby Portis. Look, this is one where I think Minnesota's the side, but missed out on the best number, and now it's too far gone to play, so an in-game side is probably going to be the way to go for me here. This opens 7.5. Mirage and one other shop are flashing 5.5 right now on my screen. So while I completely agree with the market move, we've completely missed the boat on whether or not this is playable at this point right now. Timberwolves are going to be solid offensively, especially with their starting lineups out there. And when you talk about the limit, not only offensively, but defensively now, with guys missing from this lineup for the Milwaukee Bucks, just seems like a pretty good spot here to come in and play a Minnesota team that I think has been, undervalued to start the year. And of course, the market is kind of catching on at this point, but it's just such a poor spot for Milwaukee. The total's been bumped up from 228.5 to 231.5. That makes sense given the lack of defensive personnel. The fact that if Minnesota is going to be active and competitive in a game like this, they're going to be able to generate their offense at a high level, right? So I think all of this comes together with the dog getting the action and the over getting the action, something we usually don't see, but I think I would completely agree with that. So now we get to the first game that I've got to play on here, and that would be Sacramento on the road against the Phoenix Suns. It's been pretty static across the board, right? Right now you're talking about 8 still, total of 226 at the open. But currently sitting on the board right now of 224.5. honestly kind of surprised that the total has moved in that direction. I thought this would kind of be an overplay. There's another play in terms of the total, not about you, what you get to momentarily, actually coming down a little bit, that I'm kind of surprised by too. But let's talk about this, because the Suns, the Suns have some issues here defensively that are kind of real, right? Not to the extremes that we have seen them, but I think they're legitimate issues to move forward into the season, right? Especially on defense. So through 3 games, for those who aren't keeping track, Suns from a defensive rating standpoint, 116.4, not very good. Damage being done in all sorts of areas of the floor. Giving up 66% at the rim, 44% from deep. That last mark being the worst in the NBA. And if you remember from last year, this was the worst defensive team in transition, the Phoenix Suns. The worst. They were 30th in the NBA. Bucks carved them up in the NBA Finals in transition. Lakers in that series had some success in that area of the floor, and that is continuing again here this year. 141.5 their defensive rating in the fast break, according to Cleaning the Glass. So now you get to face a Kings team, 9th in pace, 4th in offensive efficiency in transition. Sacramento, too, in terms of frequency of three-point attempts, is up there in the league as well. So that's going to be a problem for a perimeter defense that has not been good. A clean injury report for the most part, right, for the Sacramento Kings. And if you look at Phoenix, no campaign. We still, of course, are waiting for Dario Saric to recover. But I just think we're looking at this number from the perspective of, okay, we're floating around 8. This Suns team clearly power rated very high, which they should be. They're the defending Western Conference champs. But I think maybe the market's kind of low on the Phoenix Sun. Or excuse me, a little low on the Sacramento Kings. For those who were with me right on the Monday, or one of the opening days, I think was it Wednesday, when the Kings went to take on Portland, right? Double dipped in that game. Took the Kings +5, took the Kings +7. I think the market moved against them, and then all of a sudden, they go in there and they win that game outright. They have the capability of taking advantage of some relatively poor teams, especially poor teams when you're talking about within 4 feet of the basket, which statistically right now the Suns are. And I do wonder, I'm not big on this, but it's worth pointing out to a certain extent, you do wonder what the off-court stuff means for Phoenix, right? What I mean by that is the whole thing with DeAndre Ayton, the contract, all of those sort of things, how much that affects Phoenix to an extent. I don't really like to use this part of the handicap. I'll mention it at the end. But I think to me here, the market still slightly higher on Phoenix than it should be. And here's the last note too, by the way. Walton's best lineup this year. We're talking about the small ball lineup that he's got out there with De'Aaron Fox leading the way, Tyrese Halliburton, Harrison Barnes. Right now, let's see, +20 net rating with his best lineup out there on the floor. So give Sacramento some credit. I think they're a little bit better. All right, 2 more games left on the board. Roll through these ones quickly so we can get you to game time, which is going to be here in 8 minutes for the NBA card. And so Grizzlies Blazers is where we will go next. Open up of 2 here for the Trailblazers with a total of 234. Right now, 2.5 across the board. Total has not really moved. Westgate right now showing 233.5, and then Circa's got 234.5. So if you want to bet this total, you can find the best number available. Over for me was going to be the play here. And yes, 234 is really high, 233.5. But I just feel like these are 2 teams that do something well that the other has really struggled with at this early portion of the year, right? Case in point. So Portland and Memphis tonight enter 26th and 30th in defensive efficiency, respectively. Trailblazers lead the league in pace at this point right now, too. So we could see an up and down affair between 2 bad defenses. And when you look at the way they operate their offense, through the early part of the season, and I don't think this continues, but they're still going to be up there, Memphis has taken the highest frequency of attempts within 4 feet of the basket. They're shooting 65%. Makes sense when you got a guy like John Morant, right, who's super springy, slithery, can get through defenses, cut, and finish. Portland, right now, 20th in opponent frequency of attempts within 4 feet of the basket, and opponents are shooting 71% when they get to the rim. So Memphis, team that's been operating within 4 feet, taking on one of the worst rim defenses in the early part of the year in the Portland Trailblazers. On the flip side, Trailblazers take 42.6% of their attempts from deep, and they face a Grizzlies team that has allowed opponents to shoot 40% from that area of the floor. And they've given up 19 wide open three-point attempts per game through the first 4. And we're talking about per game, right? And wide open, the official metric is, of course, 6 feet or farther away. So the perimeter defense has been really shoddy for Memphis early on. You're taking on a perimeter-oriented defense. So it's just kind of surprised by the total not moving at least in one direction. So it's been static at 234. It's a pretty high total, but given the fact that both of these teams can probably get up and down the floor, given the fact that they both do something well offensively that the other struggles to defend against, seems like it might be another high-scoring affair. And then finally, Cleveland Cavaliers at the Los Angeles Clippers. Got the best of the number on the overnight here. I bet over 217. We'll talk about the side as well. But the Clippers open up with the total, or with the side of 8 with a total of 217. Right now, still 8 across the board, total of 219. Cavs are kind of the early story, though, right? I get it. We're all talking about the Chicago Bulls and how good they have done. But again, another hot start here for Cleveland. If you remember last year, they got off to a hot start. I think it was 3-0 to start the year, if I remember correctly. Really fell off, as we know. But there's a chance here that it's just like real to the extent of, right, being like a 30-ish win team for Cleveland. But anyway, when you look at this game, Clippers, I think, have been pretty impressive offensively. 112.4 points every 100 possessions on offense. They have been great in the half court, quietly one of the best half court offenses in the NBA a season ago. Picked that up here again. Third best in terms of offensive efficiency in half court plays at 101.6. Marcus Morris is not going to play today, so while that might hurt you from an offensive standpoint, it's also one less solid wing defender on the floor for the Los Angeles Clippers. And you get to take on a Cavaliers team from a defensive standpoint, 19th in half-court defense, 94.7 per 100. And the Clippers, of course, high-paced team as well in terms of what they've been doing in terms of possessions per game. Right now, according to the NBA, let's see, we've got tied for third the Los Angeles Clippers at about 105.3 possessions per game through this early part of the season. So I played that over the 217. So with that, that's the entire card. About 26 minutes or so right now. We're going to do these again on kind of the bigger cards. Appreciate everybody that has joined in. John Morant took point total 25.5. Ruffy, I would assume that is shaded to the over. You could shop around, maybe find a couple more different spots for that, but it would make sense for Morant's point total to be baked a little bit higher. But this does seem like a matchup in which he should be able to thrive. With his ability to get within 4 feet of the basket with the poor perimeter defenders that this team has in the Portland Trailblazers, I think that's going to be an issue for them. Oh, and by the way, too, let me double check this really quickly, make sure that this is going to be up. Yeah, keep an eye out for Norm Powell. He's questionable to play as well here tonight, so that will help you out in terms of betting that game over the total. But yeah, so we're going to do these during the big cards. Look for another one of these things on Friday. Hopefully you enjoyed it a lot. And again, tomorrow we will be broadcasting the Hardwood Handicappers podcast live again. Multiple spots, Twitch, YouTube, and of course, the Twitter account. So really enjoy the feedback. Any feedback you have, of course, at me, JVT. I tended to try to do a good job in terms of responding to the people who reach out, because really appreciate any feedback and any interaction I get with any of all of you. So with that, good luck in every single sport, and we will check in with you again for these Betting the Board previews on Friday.